hummingbird that I'm talking about today is the ruby-throated hummingbird in the Torchillidae family, and it's about the only one we're going to see in Illinois. Every once in a while, we're going to see another hummingbird, which I'll talk about just here in a few seconds. So, hummingbirds in the world. We are really, really lucky here in our part of the country to a certain degree, and I'll explain that more later. There are no hummingbirds in Asia, Europe, Antarctica, Africa, Australia, or in the Arctic. There are 19 species of hummingbirds in North America. That's what I was kind of saying. We're kind of lucky, but we could be even more lucky if we were down by California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana. That's where they're going to see a lot more. Now, the other one that I was talking about is the rufous hummingbird, which periodically will migrate into our part of the country, and you may see them for just a very short period of time at your feeders or flower beds. So the hummingbird body, this is very, very fascinating. It has one of the highest metabolic rates of any animal. When you think of the heart rate, your heart rate is usually around 72. Theirs are 1,200 beats per minute. The wings beat 60 times a second. That's a second when they're hovering. The breathing rate, that is 250 breaths per minute, even at rest. So we think that they suck the nectar out of flowers. They don't. They lick it. And they have a W-shaped tongue, and it's got tiny hairs like a cat. If you've ever been licked by your cat, you know how those little hairs on it kind of bristle. And what they do is they lick that, and it forces that nectar towards the back of the throat each time they lick, and pushes it back farther and farther each time, and then they can swallow it. Their brain, 4.2% of their body weight. They are very, very smart and can remember where food is found. And this is going to be very, very important. Cleanliness in a lot of things is very important. This is one of the things that I will elaborate more as we go on. During flight, the oxygen consumption per gram of muscle is up to 10 times higher than if a human athlete is running or doing his physical therapy. They can fly horizontally 30 miles per hour, but they can dive up to 60 miles per hour. Now, hummingbirds can't walk or hop. They have short legs, and that's kind of to help keep their total weight down. But they can shuffle on a branch, or if you notice them on your feeder, they will move back and forth. But it isn't really a walk or a hop. But fascinating that even though they can't walk or hop, they can still raise their foot over their wing to scratch their head or neck. They have between 1,000 and 1,500 body feathers. 25% of 25 to 30% of their body weight is actually in their pectoral muscles, and that's the one that really runs their wings. They have no sense of smell, but have very good color vision, and that's what we're going to be talking why that is important later on. And they can even see into the ultraviolet spectrum. Again, it's very, very important. I was talking about the brain and why it's important to keep your feeders clean, because they will remember a dirty feeder. So, hummingbird life information. This is just more or less about their life. The oldest hummingbird was 9 years and 1 month old. It was a female, and from West Virginia. I don't know how they ever figured out how they found it and they tagged it or what, but that they do know that it was 9 years and 1 month old. Normal lifespan for a female, the normal life is 7 years, and for males, much less, they live only up to 5 years, and that's because if you've ever had a hummingbird in your yard, you know they're defending that territory and fighting each other, and then they have a lot of loss of weight following migration. Vocalization. They have rapid, squeaky chirps, but then they also, a number of times when they're fighting, especially the males again, when they're trying to protect their area, will flap their wings against their tail feathers and make that buzzing sound. Another time they do that is when the males are trying to impress the females right before breeding. As far as things that like to be predatory on your hummingbirds, praying mantises are a real threat. Jenny gave me a picture of a praying mantis she saw on her hummingbird feeder. Now, I don't want you to go and anytime you see that, to go kill the praying mantis. They are a very beneficial insect, but just take them off and move them somewhere else. You want to watch your feeders for the ambushing adult praying mantis, because they can kill. Unfortunately, if you look at the picture there, you can see that they actually will kill a hummingbird if given the chance. Blue jays, bats, squirrels, chipmunks like to rob nests. Also, raccoons and snakes are another threat. So a little bit of hummingbird facts. I'm going to talk about their habitat, their behavior, nesting, food, conservation, and backyard tips. And I was telling you where we found them. My sister Janice from Wahpeton, North Dakota, sent me this picture that she had of one of her hummingbird feeders in her house. So I was just glad that she was able to send that to me, and a very good picture. So hummingbird habitat. They are found in our deciduous woodlands of eastern North America and up into the Canadian prairies, and all the way up. You know, when I'm talking about this hummingbird, I'm talking about the ruby-throated hummingbird. So they're tropical, wintering in southern US and Mexico, and it's in the dry forests, the citrus groves, the hedgerows, and the scrub brush. They do not like to be in the rainforest areas. And like I showed you on the previous slide, they do migrate from Canada all the way to Costa Rica. Where we're going to see them in our area, where they're going to be in the gardens, whether they're vegetable gardens or flower gardens or trees, where you have nectar producing flowers. So wood edges, semi-open habitat is where we're likely to see them. Hummingbird habitat change. So we're always concerned about, we hear about the polar bears and things, how habitat has changed that. Well, for hummingbirds, 85% has been maintained at a balance. 15% has been lost, and that's in the western regions of the United States, in our part where the rufous or the ruby-throated is. But we've also gained 42% in the northern part of the United States and in Canada. So overall, we thought they were declining, but counts show that they're not. We're actually maintaining, or actually increasing a little bit. Okay, hummingbird habitat seasonal change. So I'm talking about, they're not here for the whole year. So they fly from the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, and they arrive in Florida, Louisiana, and some of the other states that I mentioned, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. And from there, they'll recoup a little bit. But that trip from the Yucatan, they fly across the Gulf of Mexico, is a 500-mile, 20-hour flight over open water. So that flight requires more calories than what their normal body weight is. So they burn up enough calories to use up the 3 gram or 0.11 ounce of their normal body weight. Research has found that they need to, before they start that flight across either coming or going, they need to at least double their fat weight before that flight is made over open water. Otherwise, they won't make it. Okay, the hummingbird courtship. Males like to fly back and forth in front of the female in a wide U-shaped pendulum. While they're doing that, they're going to beat those wings against those tail feathers to kind of impress the females, so that I don't know if the louder they can make that sound, the more that they're supposed to impress the female or what, but they do that. As soon as the males leave immediately after breeding, but they will defend their territory aggressively, and that is one of the reasons they are so aggressive that their lifelong, you know, if you work hard outside or doing very physical work, usually it takes a toll on your body, and that's where males only live an average of 5 years compared to 7 years for females. Again, males may leave as soon as August to migrate south. So there will be something I'll add that's very important for that reason. One of the other things I found interesting was hummingbirds do not mate for life. Okay, the hummingbird nest building. Females build her nest on a slender, usually descending branch rather than a fork. And that nest is usually surrounded by a lot of leaf matter of a deciduous tree. They prefer oak, hornbeam, birch, sycamore, or poplar. I have had them in my sycamore. I found them there more often than not. And I kind of find, you know, I always said, why would I want a sycamore in my yard? Well, I guess this is the only good, you know, you have your good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, the sycamore is considered the bad and the ugly. But this is one reason that I will keep it in my yard, is that branch is, you know, and if you think about it, those branches are kind of whitish. And if you look at the nest, the nest would kind of camouflage right onto that descending branch. So that could be why they use that a little bit more. Usually the nest is 10 to 40 feet above the ground. And the nests have been found, you know, if they get desperate, I guess, or if a male is defending a certain area, they've been found on loops of chain, wire, and even extension cords. The nest is made up of compact cup of grasses, plant fibers, spider webs, and it's lined with down from dandelion, thistledown, and animal hair. So usually I like to put out a little bit of, you know, my neighbor cat comes over, so I'll save a little bit of, when in the spring they're usually shedding, or if you have a dog, if you comb it, you might just save a little bit of that hair and put it out in an area near your hummingbirds, and they may use that for their nests. We'll use pine resin to stiffen the base of the nest, and you can often, if you find the nest, you'll see that little female in there jumping up and down, and what she's doing is she's packing that bottom onto that branch so as to stiffen and to really stick that nest onto that branch. The pine resin is from, if you have pine trees, you've seen the yellow bellied sapsucker marks, or just about any tree. Those lines of holes that are horizontal on a tree, almost in a straight line, that's where the hummingbirds will go, and they'll get some of the pine resin from that, or if there's a wound on a pine tree for some reason, they'll get a little bit of that. It's very sticky, so it really and it hardens up after it dries, so it really helps the strength of the nest. Also, they will also pull stuck insects that are in there later on if they find them for their young. It takes 6 to 10 days for the female to finish her nest. And the nest will vary, but it's usually around 2 inches across and about 1 inch deep. The hummingbird young, usually 1 to 3 very small white eggs. They almost look like little breath mints or something like that, almost that size. The female will incubate the eggs for 11 to 16 days. The egg size is 0.5 by 0.3 inches, and they weigh about 1/5 of an ounce. The nesting period, now this is from the time that she lays her eggs until they leave the nest, is 18 to 22 days. And again, the female is the one that is going to feed the young. Sometimes that will, depending on the temperature and the egg, that can be extended just up to 25, 26 days, but usually it's 18 to 20 days on an average. The female can have 1 to 2 broods per year, and she may actually begin building her second nest if she still has those chicks, those hatchlings in her first nest. She'll start building a second nest while still feeding the first brood in her nest, in the first nest that she has made. So she's going to be, if it takes 6 to 10 days to make the nest, she's going to be really, really busy and is going to be coming to your feeder. So very important that you keep that feeder full and clean. You're going to hear me say clean a lot when I refer to that feeder. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. Okay, the hummingbird food. They feed on nectar of tubular flowers. If you were listening to Pat on the previous talk, you know that there were certain flowers that she referred to that they especially like. Red and orange are probably the one that they're drawn to. But there are, that's the ones they're drawn to, that because like I said, they have very good vision, and they will be drawn to that. So it's important that you not only have the red and orange, but you can have other plants and flowers there, but you need the red or orange to draw them there. Or we'll talk about something else, having red objects in your yard near those flowers. They also love to feed at hummingbird feeders. Thank goodness for that. They can also catch insects midair. They pull them out of spider webs or stuck in the tree sap. I talked to you about the yellow sap or yellow bellied sapsucker. They will, being they know where those are, they know where to go and find. They'll see insects that are stuck in that. And they'll pull small insects out of that. Their main foods include mosquitoes, gnats, fruit flies, and then they also will pull aphids off of leaves if you have some of those. Now, kind of important, you have to kind of watch around your hummingbird feeder. There are some of the spiders that will actually build quite large and strong webs around the hummingbird feeders, and you need to kind of get rid of those. I don't mind spiders in my yard because I know they get rid of a lot of harmful insects, but around my hummingbird feeders, I don't want the hummingbirds to be caught, especially if it's a large. If it's a very weak and very tiny fibered web, I don't worry about that because the hummingbirds actually use some of that for their nests, but you want to keep an eye on, make sure that that's not around your, a very large one is not something that they're going to get stuck into. Going back to that yellow-bellied sapsucker on your pine trees, they will feed on sap. Also, it's a very weak sugar, but it's even weaker. It's that probably on tree sap is probably anywhere from a 30-to-1 to a 50-to-1 sugar contest. So, but if they're desperate, they will go that. Insects, again, are very, very important when they have young in the nest. And the reason for that is the young need the protein and the minerals for their body growth. I mean, you just can't survive on sugar alone. You need that protein and those minerals, and that's all gotten from the insects. Okay, the liquid that you're going to be putting into your hummingbird feeders. You make your liquid with white sugar. Very, very important that it's white sugar. You mix 1 part of sugar normally to 4 parts of water. And again, no dyes, no chemicals. If you have washed your feeder, make sure that you have aired it out, that you have put water in it, rinsed it out. I usually like to use even just a little bit of a weak Clorox solution in between, but I make sure that there is no odor, no residue of that in there. I don't usually use soap because it's very hard to get all of it out. I will use a body brush or a bottle brush, not a body brush. It'd be kind of hard to get that in there, but a bottle brush to really clean it out. So after I've made that, before I add my sugar to the water, I boil the water. Again, it's so important that the food that you're giving them is clean. And then I add the sugar when the water's still hot and let it cool. And then I will feed it, put it into the feeder. Very important that you do not use honey, molasses, agave, or the sugar substitutes. There's no energy in that sugar substitute. And for the honey, molasses, and agave, they just cannot break that down into energy that they need. Again, we've talked about clean feeders. I talked to Pat too, and she is very fanatical about keeping her bird feeders clean. Make sure that there's no mold. If you see mold, you need to really, really clean it. And again, Clorox is a real good mold deterrent, but because the mold in those feeders can be fatal to your hummingbirds. You want to change your food every 2 to 3 days, especially in hot weather, because sugar will ferment, especially if they're sticking their little tongue in there and licking. If there's bees around, if there's any other contaminant, that sugar is going to feed on that and is going to ferment. And again, that means there's going to be alcohol in that water, in that nectar, and that may not be real good for them. But again, when you do clean your feeders, it's so important that it's just not clean from the sugar and the other residues that are in there, but make sure that if you've used Clorox, if you have used soap, make sure that it's rinsed out completely. I like to, if I have to do that, I will put water in it, let it sit on the counter for a while, and pour it out, and do that a couple of times just to make sure that fluid is going to be, that nectar that I'm going to give them is as clean and as pure as I can. After I've dried it out, then I'll put the nectar in. And again, depending on how much food you're going through, how much nectar if you put it in half full and it's only maybe they've only used half of that in 3 days, maybe next time you only have to give them half of that and then monitor it very close, because you don't want to run out either. But remember I told you that hummingbirds have large brains for their side of they remember if you have bad food, if you have mold, if you have fermented feed, they're going to try to find someplace else. They're going to go to flowers. They're going to go somewhere else. And if for some reason you would have bad food and you didn't catch it right away, kind of put the feeder, when you clean it, put it back out, but don't put it in the exact spot right away where you had it before. If it's your favorite spot, I would still move it a couple of feet away and then put it back after they're normally coming back to that feeder. Okay, one of the advantages I found is hang feeders in a shaded area that the sun usually will tend to make the feed go bad sooner. And then use an ant guard. Ants are one of my biggest bugaboos. That and bees and wasps. Wasps probably even more than. I don't have too much of a problem with bees. I have a problem with ants with wasps and hornets. They like to get in and try to rob the nectar. You may want to hang them in different areas so they cannot be seen from other feeders, especially if you're having a lot of males fighting. If you're hearing a lot of the males coming and flapping their wings against their tails, they're protecting that area. And if you can hang that feeder in an area still visible to you, but not so much from the one feeder, then you're going to have less fighting. And as you can see on this one, they provide a perch on this feeder, and that's really, really nice. Not so much for the hummingbird, but for you, because you're going to be able. It's going to sit there and rest for a while. It may lick up some nectar, sit there for a while, and then lick up some more. Now, if it's nesting, it's going to be back and forth quite a bit. Make sure that you never use any dyes, preservatives, or other chemicals. And when you're cleaning it, make sure there's nothing in there to contaminate. I don't like buying pre-made. I like to make my own because I know what I'm putting into it. In the fall, we talked about making it a 4-to-1 ratio. In the fall, August, and we'll talk more about this again, but a 3-to-1 ratio is pretty good because they're going to need to build up their fat reserves for that migratory flight, both males and females. During nesting time, I found that if you hang some old banana peels, or if you have an old apple or just any fruit near their nest or near their feeder, you're going to attract fruit flies, and you'll actually see the hummingbird catch those midair and take them to their hatchlings, which, like we had talked before, are needed for their protein and for building strong little hatchlings. You want those to be as healthy and as vibrant as you can. Hummingbirds every day need half of its body weight in sugar. You think about that. If you figure out how heavy you are, and figure if you had to eat that much every day. For me, that would be. They feed 5 to 8 times an hour, especially maybe higher than that during when they have hatchlings. Again, they do not suck the nectar; they lick it, and their tongue is kind of in the shape of a W. It's like a forked tongue, and they can lick. Think of this. Try to do this too. Lick 10 to 15 times a second. So the sugar is made out of sucrose, and they can digest that in 20 minutes with a 97% efficiency to convert that sugar to energy. Now, just think of the food that you eat. You know, yeah, we're converting it to energy, but a lot of it we're wasting. Think if we were able to use 97% of what we ate into our energy, we'd be buzzing around like a hummingbird, maybe. Okay, conservation. We thought the population was going down, but populations have actually increased steadily since 1966. I think that's about when we started to kind of count how many hummingbirds we had. The global breeding population of 20 million birds. We figure we have around 20 million birds. That's including the not just our birds, but all through the different parts of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. There's about 20 million birds, and of that, 84% are spending some type of the year in the United States. 51% of the time in Mexico, and that's usually in when all our birds migrate south, and even some of those in the northern parts of like Arizona and things where it gets cold and go south, and then about 16% in Canada, because it does, you know, their timeline for them to be up there is a lot less than here. When food is scarce, hummers will actually go into a type of hibernation, and it's called cocor, and they do that just to conserve energy. Backyard tips to attract hummingbirds. I took this picture up at Bouchard Gardens, and I wanted to show you this picture because you see those slanty lines, those wavy lines, and the inside of some of the, I'll have more pictures, but the middle of it is a little bit taller than the other. But you don't need huge areas for flowers, but the larger and the more variety you can grow. If you watch Pat's, she has hundreds and hundreds of plant variety. Not all of them are good for hummers, but you know, all you need is a percentage of it, and the more you have, the better they're going to be. And she has so many hummingbirds in her yard that it's truly amazing. You need, and Pat talked about this, you need a variety of plants that grow in shade, full sun, and that flower at different times, so that nectar is available over the whole season. You know, it doesn't do very much good if all your flowers bloom really nice in June and July. You've got all those other months that they're going to be there. What are they going to do during that period of time? So the long curving lines tend to offer more viewing ability for the birds, and for the birds to spread out. And then you want to separate the beds for better feeding, so they're not fighting all the time. So these here are just a couple of close beds, but as you can see, way in the background, there's lots of other beds that they could go to. Okay, color. We talked about this, the red, the orange, the pink are best. If red flowers are not blooming at that time, especially in the spring, place red ribbons, gazing balls, painted red bench, bird bath. Oh, and then also, this is another segment into it, you want to have bird baths there. Now you can have a red bird bath, but most of us aren't going to have a red bird bath. But the bird bath is to attract hummingbirds to that area because they love clean water, especially if you can have a mist or something going through it. So these red objects, they're not going to be able to feed off that, but it's going to attract them to that area. They're going to see the red, and they're going to find the nectar in your non-red flowers. And I like I said, the water feature is more for them to fly through, and they enjoy that. Plant different height flowers to increase the flower visibility. Flower visibility is very important. Like I said, they have wonderful visibility. They don't have any sense of smell. So tier planting is a plus to attract birds. Plant your tall plants in the middle or towards the back. Native plants are usually best, but not necessary. They will find that the nectar, no matter whether it's native or not. But then considering insects, that's where the natives are much more beneficial. Avoid pesticides if possible, as hummers need small insects for their hatchlings. Deadhead your flowers. if you have time, to promote more and longer seasons of flower. Like I said, that season is so important. This picture on the very bottom, you see, leave the top twig for perching. They love to perch and kind of survey the area. So this is a picture that I found where that hummer is just sitting there, kind of surveying the area, protecting it. This might be a male. I couldn't tell whether it was a male or female, but sometimes they just like to rest. Sometimes they're surveying, and if they see another hummingbird, they will aggressively protect that area. And don't just think you have to use flowers. Use trees, shrubs, annuals, perennials, bulbs. Again, resting area, whether it's a twig or something where they can land on and have a clear view of wherever their flowers that they're feeding on or their feeder is. Again, do not use herbicides or pesticides, especially when flowering. Now, they do not go to the leaves or anything like that. So if you've got something eating your leaves, and you can very carefully spray your leaves and things like that to get rid of those insects, then fine. But it's just best not to, for your health and theirs. Again, like Pat, if you looked at Pat's yard, she always had something blooming at all times. Now, early spring and mid to late fall flowers are the most difficult to come by, but they're the most needed, as this is usually when there's less nectar. Butterfly garden, if you are into butterfly gardening, they're a good asset also, because a lot of things that the butterflies like, the hummingbirds like. I've got a handout that talks about the maximizing your ability to draw them, and I will read just a few of the things. The trees, shrubs, and fruit: apple, blackcurrant, cherry, gooseberry, hawthorn, linden, locust, pear, plum, raspberries, strawberries, lilacs, willows. I have a red buckeye that's probably one of the favorites of my hummingbirds, but it's only for a short period of time. Butterfly bush, catalpas. As far as flowers, some of those that Pat talked about was her salvia. I have 300 varieties of hostas, so some bloom early, some bloom very late, and the white ones seem to attract, the white flowery hostas seem to attract the hummingbirds the most. Lantana, nicotina, delphiniums, dahlias, crepe myrtles, cleome, coral bells, century plant, cardinal flower, that's another good one, canas, butterfly weed, bleeding hearts, bee balm, ajuga, hollyhocks, impatiens, iris, liatris, lilies, lupins, nasturtiums, paintbrush, and pentacetum and petunias. That's some of them, and that you don't have to go if it has nectar, and if you can get them to that area. You can see I've got red, white, but they'll hit all of those, and even the yellow ones. Okay, we're going to go over kind of a month by month here. This is April. This is right before, even in March. You could even start now. Does your yard shout red? If a bird was flying over, from high above, would he see red, or she? So what you want to do is get some red ribbon, red artificial flowers, red gazing balls, or any other red object, just to get the hummingbird to come down and look. You want to put your feeders out the first week in April for early hummers. Place the feeder near your red visual drawing points. And if you wonder if the hummingbirds, where they are, because it varies a week here and there when they're going to come, you can go to hummingbirdcentral.com. I can usually, in my yard, I have the native old-fashioned columbine. The day that it opens is the day that I almost inevitably I see my first hummingbird. And I don't know if that's because the columbine is also controlled by the weather, and the hummingbirds kind of know that, but I use that as my barometer as much as anything. So columbine is that old native red yellow columbine is the one, and even my granddaughter likes it because she'll pick the flowers and bite off the very ends of it because it's got all kinds of honey and sweetness in there. So between my daughter or my granddaughter Amelia and the hummingbirds, I have lots of columbine. May, again, you're going to watch for males first, and again, probably you might start seeing them in April, but you'll see some followed later by females. Once the females are here, they're thinking basically one thing: nesting. So you want to make sure at the very beginning. I even put some of my nesting stuff out mid-April or towards the end of April, and so that they can have that for their nest building. They can find it, but I just love to have them there. And I figure the more I put out of that stuff, the more that I'm going to have in my yard. You're going to want to have early blooming flowers out available, even if they're in pots. I have lots of dandelions. I don't spray my yard because of that. I like the bees. I have orchard bees. I've even had I have my hellebores out, and I've had even right now I have bees there that are on that. And I was cleaning them up, and I said, "What is that buzzing?" And it was bees. So again, this picture is of a little fountain. You can see that the hummingbird loves to fly through that and splash in it. Keep the water clean. Again, keep that clean. You don't want any mold or mildew on that, so keep that clean. Use bubblers. They love to see that. And they like to bathe and fly through the misters if you have a mister. In June, you're going to watch for the females feeding while nesting. And then when they come to your feeder, it may take you a few times, but like I say, they're coming 8 to 10, 12 times an hour. Follow them, and you can usually find their nest. It may take you a while, but you'll find it. They're usually very small, size of a walnut, but watch for the first fledglings in late June. At this time, again, very important. You want to grow your vines and flowers, good for hummers. Again, I listed some items here, but I already read that, so I'm not going to go over that at this time, but you can, any of those are good for your hummers. July, watch for the first young at feeders. You're going to know they're young. They're a little bit smaller, but you can tell just by, it's like your little 1-year-old that's starting to learn to walk. They're falling. They're not falling, but they're bumping into things and flying clumsily, and they're just kind of funny to watch. Again, make sure that nectar flower is available. Deadhead, keep your feeders fresh, full, and clean. August, watch for your northern migrating hummingbirds coming from Canada and like North Dakota and areas that could be getting cold. If you start to see a lot of fighting, put out more feeders and place them. If you adding, put it so that one male cannot dominate all. At this time, I like to start making my mix 3 to 1, 3 parts water to 1 part sugar rather than 4 to 1, because the migrating males need to build up that fat reserve because they're going to start leaving in August. So the sooner that they can start building up those fat reserves, the better. Okay, September. Watch for the second brood. Keep old fruit near the feeders. Again, it's so important that mom gets those fruit flies and other insects to that second brood because they're almost having to mature almost quicker because that first brood was able to stay around and grow some strength. These second ones don't have as much time, so they need more insects and things to get their bodies available. This one I had told you before that they usually like to build their nest on a descending branch, not on a fork. Well, here's an exception. Look at that. She built it right on a little fork, but it is on a descending branch, so I'll give her that. She did build it there. You may see migrating birds arrive. Keep enough full, clean feeders. I keep saying full, clean. And again, at this time, still keep your mix 3-to-1. And National Hummingbird Day is the first Saturday in September, which is kind of strange because most of our hummingbirds, not most of them, a lot of them have already left, especially the males. But hey, we'll celebrate. You know, maybe it was the only Saturday they had to open because everything else has a day for their national. So I took the next picture again up in Bouchard Gardens in Vancouver. I love the high flowing gardens, and just remember, if you get the hummingbirds to hatch in your yard, they're likely to return there. Hummingbirds are solitary migration, so you won't see flocks. But if you do, in your yard, flocks are called bouquets, glittering, shimmer, or attuned. I guess okay. I'm all done. So,
all right, John, do you have, we have a few minutes for questions. Remember that if you don't get your question answered, we will email you in the next week or so with an answer. Several of the questions were centered around that cleaning of the feeder. You said to boil the water for a minute or longer. You could put some bleach in if you have some mold problems, but no soap, they're asking. And how much bleach? And if you don't use any soap, how do you get the black mold off the feeder, especially around the feeder holes?
Yeah, I have a very, some of your toothpicks have the little brushes on them. You can find the little things that cling in they're almost like dental floss, but they're picks, and they have the little tiny hairs on them, and they work wonderful for cleaning out those holes. But yeah, I don't like using soap because it's so hard to get rid of all the residue. I will use it, but then I will rinse and rinse and rinse and rinse. If I get any, when I fill it in, I will pour the water in as fast as I can. If there's any foaming, I will not use that feeder yet. I will put it on the counter, fill it with water, let it sit, pour it out, and do that so I can dilute whatever is in there. As far as Clorox, less than 10%. You need a 10% or less concentration. So 1 part Clorox to 9 parts of water, and that's going to be more than enough to kill any of the bacteria. And what I usually do is make it, fill it, and just let it sit there for a half hour, an hour, and that's going to be enough time for that Clorox to do its work. And then I take a bottle brush, and really scrub that inside and even the outside of the container off. The cleaner it is, I know Pat agrees with me in that cleanliness is next to godliness.
It is in hummingbirds. They sell little brushes just for hummingbirds.
Okay.
For the feeding ports.
Okay.
You can find them at any store that sells hummingbird supplies. Yeah. They're just a tiny little brush.
Yeah, just very
makes
small.
A big difference because it's very hard.
That's where they're sticking their tongue, and yes. You want that. You don't want any mold or mildew in there.
Right. Well,
okay, John and Pat, do you have any suggestions for dealing with wasps real quickly for our listeners?
I just have not had any luck in keeping wasps away. Have you ever had any?
Wipe off the outside of your hummingbird feeder. If you spill some, or if it gets jarred and it sloshes out, keep that wiped off. And that's about the best I've got for you, because they just are naturally attracted.
Yeah, because they're going to be sticky on the outside, and they're going to be looking at. You can't get usually into deep enough to get their tongue, or the wasps don't have a big tongue like wasps. So again, cleanliness is so very important.
Does that mean with ants too? I mean, just keeping the outside of your feeder clean will prevent.
It is, but the ant mold is really works wonderfully. I have not, since I've started using ant mold, I have not had an ant problem in my feeder. The most important thing as far as the ant mold is to keep that filled with water, because if it's empty, it doesn't work. You've got to keep that full of water. Ants won't cross water. They won't swim across water.
All right, maybe one more question, John. Someone asked how many feeders you need per half acre.
Yeah.
Hang up 3 or 4 spread out, see if you still have a problem, and then just add gradually would be, because it's hard to estimate how many hummingbirds you're going to have, especially if you're new to hummingbirds. It takes them a while. They're a little cautious when they first come to a new feeder. So put up several in what areas that you want to use them in. And if you still see there's a crowding problem, keep adding. I have a cluster of about 5 or 6 in one area, and then I let my flowers pretty much feed them from there. But their memory is good.
Depends on the blocking or the type of flowers you have too, and how many feeders you have.
And what's in bloom
and
all the time.
Yeah, if you don't have something out at the time, blooming at the time, you need more feeders, because you need to keep them fed. If you don't have any late flowers or early flowers, that's when you need more feeders. So, okay, I guess we're about out of time. If you ask a question and we didn't answer it, we will send out an email to answer your question. I want to thank you for joining us. And I want just one more thing. I always end up my radio show by saying, if you look the right way, the whole world is a garden.